Hello, everybody. My name is Marie, and my presentation this week is going to be on blood constituents and their functions. And the objectives for this lesson is to learn what the constituents of blood are, what do these constituents or parts of the blood do for us, and where are they made. And then I'm going to end with some research on a condition of the blood called anemia. And I would like to begin with a framework for where the circulatory is in our bodies and how it's related to the lymphatic system. And as you can see in this diagram, the red shows oxygenated blood that must be coming from the heart after it's been to the lungs. And as the tissues use that blood, it gets deoxygenated. The oxygen gets used up, the concentration of CO2 increases, and this deoxygenated blood travels back to the heart to once again get oxygenated. But there is a lymph system that innervates our circulatory system, and it's really a bunch of tubules that innervate and come in contact with it. And in between, there is this interstitial fluid. So molecules can come in and out of these vessels, and they can have an effect on that interstitial fluid, and molecules sometimes can get into and out of this lymph system. And then there are other cells here of the tissue that you can see. Blood elicits all kinds of emotions for us. Everyone has it. Everybody has seen it. Some people, it makes them nervous. We donate it. It's critical for life, and it's a really important part of our body that many people can relate to. And blood, when it's constantly moving, as in this diagram over here, you can see things are mixed up, and there are lots of different kinds of components. It's not just the red blood cells. So if blood is stopped or if it's centrifuged, what happens is the heavier elements fall to the bottom in what is called a hematocrit, and the red blood cells make up 44% of our blood, and then the white blood cells and platelets make up only 1% of our blood, and this forms what's called a buffy coat because it usually comes up as being a light cream color. And then the plasma, which is the watery part of our blood that houses many important ions and other molecules, makes up 55% of our blood. So let's go through each part of the blood one by one, and we're going to begin with the plasma. And the plasma is the watery part of our blood, 90% water, that absorbs and distributes molecules. And it carries these inorganic molecules, specifically electrolytes, the most important ones being sodium and chlorine, but also bicarbonate, potassium, calcium, and other ions. And these ions are really important in maintaining membrane excitability, and very importantly helps in buffering the pH. And the pH of our blood, there's a very narrow range of pH that our blood must be all the time, or else death ensues. The plasma proteins come in three big categories: the albumins, the globulins, and the fibrinogens. And if we take a look over here, albumin is one. And then we have the immunoglobulins, which are a part of the immune system, and antibodies. We have coagulation factors here, which are very important in clotting our blood. Erythrocytes are the red blood cells. Each milliliter of our blood contains 5 billion red blood cells, and these are the great oxygen transporters. Their structure, these little round indented discs that we're all familiar with, their structure and function is related to each other, and they are this shape because they don't have organelles on the inside, and they have these very, very flexible membranes that allows the cells to be able to squeeze through capillaries. Hemoglobin, which is only found in red blood cells, is a special molecule that is made up of 4 long protein chains, alpha chain 1 and 2, beta chain 1 and 2, but within each of these, there is one heme group. And the heme group is responsible for attaching to the oxygen. They carry oxygen to the tissues of the cells and then picks up CO2, but they can also transfer carbon monoxide and nitric oxide also. Our blood is made by erythropoiesis in our liver, spleen, and bone marrow, and as we age, it becomes more and more in some of the long bones of the femur, the sternum, and pluripotent cells are responsible, these stem cells are responsible for creating our red blood cells. So when we're younger, it's called red bone marrow, and as we age, some of that marrow gets replaced with fat, and it's called yellow bone marrow. The lifespan of a red blood cell is only about 120 days, and this is really the price that it pays for not having any organelles. Red blood cells and other cells, when they are done doing their jobs, end up in our spleens, which remove these cells. Leukocytes are the white blood cells, and leukocytes can be divided into 2 major groups. One is granulocytes, and the other is agranulocytes. And as you can see here, the top 3, the neutrophils, eosinophils, and basophils, are all granulated. And you can see these little packets of cells within these larger cells, and the nuclei tend to be irregular and multinuclear in shape. They are so named because of the dyes that they have an affinity for. The neutrophils do not have a dye preference. The eosinophils have an affinity for red dye, and the basophils have an affinity for blue dye. The agranulocytes, the lymphocytes, and the monocytes are very important molecules in our immune systems. Monocytes will go on to become macrophages, and the lymphocytes go on to become B cells and T cells. And the B cells, of course, produce antibodies, and T cells are really important in cell-mediated immunity. And what I would like to do now is show you a very cool video of white blood cells. And this was a discovery and film made at the University of California. As you can see, these are amoeba and/or white blood cells that are actually chasing a bacterial cell. This research and film was led by Richard Fertel, and they used amoeba to actually discover a multi-protein complex called SCA1, which controls another set of proteins called RAS. And this RAS, they believe, connects the directing sensitivity complex to its molecular motors, so the white blood cells actually know where to go to follow little bacteria. They believe that this research is going to be helpful in developing drugs that can help in inflammation and metastasizing tumors. The platelets are also called thrombocytes, and platelets are very important in clotting our blood. They remain functional for an average of 10 days, and they are actually made up of detached little vesicles from the cell. So they don't have nuclei, but they may have other kinds of organelles. Platelets are really important in stopping bleeding, and they do this in 3 ways. They have a vascular spasm, which means the vessels constrict. They form a platelet plug, and the platelets can actually stick to the damaged vesicles and then the blood coagulates. And all in all, there are about 12 clotting factors that are really important in clotting our blood. And now I would like to talk a little bit about an interesting study done on a Korean population. And the scientists were trying to analyze the association between hand grip strength and anemia in Korean adults. And in this cross-sectional study, which means they took a large population and looked at a specific point in time, they looked at whether the people had anemia and measured their hand strength with this digital grip strength dynamometer right here. So they could tell exactly how hard they were gripping this little machine. They used subjects over 19 years of age, and the Korean National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey is done by an organization that would be analogous to like our CDC. So they had lots and lots of information. They knew the people's physical activity, illnesses, age, socioeconomic status, sex, and lots of other data. What they found was that anemia generally signifies low muscle mass and is an indicator of poor clinical mobility. And regardless of sex and age, there was a significant association between hand grip strength and anemia. The trend of weak hand grip strength with and without anemia was more pronounced in the males and in people less than 65 years of age. There were limitations for interpreting their results, and they did state that we should be careful that we do not state causal relationships between some of the variables that were in the study and this particular thing that they were looking at, the hand grip strength, and that there were many variables, and these were surveys, so there may be some sort of a recall bias. But very important study, and as people get older, it is probably, you could probably make a general conclusion that hand grip strength is a sign of your mobility and strength. These are my references. Thank you.